I'm AC Brown, and you're listening to Is My Aura On Straight, a podcast designed to help you start living from your core instead of your conditioning. Each week, we'll discuss topics ranging from human design, astrology, metaphysics, spiritual self-development, and everything in between. Hello, and welcome to another episode of Is My Aura On Straight. I am your host, AC Brown. I am your spiritual doula, your intuitive strategist, and human design expert, and I'm also an entrepreneur, and I want to thank you for joining me for another episode of Is My Aura On Straight. Today, we're going to be talking about your open centers. This is extremely important. The centers, woo child, it's a lot going on there. But your centers are where you need the most healing. So everyone doesn't have necessarily all centers open or very open. Some people only have one center open. Some people only have a few. If you're a reflector, you have all of your centers open. So you're susceptible to a lot of conditioning, but we'll talk about that in a little bit. But like I said, the centers are where you need the most healing. So open centers is where your inner child lives. It's where you get conditioned by your parents, by society, etc. So your open centers absorb all the thoughts, energies, beliefs, and values of your parent, your culture, and even your religion, when thinking about all of the things that you've gone through as a child. So we essentially become conditioned over time by the people around us, as you know. So anything that is open in your chart, especially what the centers are, it becomes like a sponge, like an antenna. It picks up the things around it. So it is just like, just constantly pulling other people's thoughts, opinions, conditioning into your own psyche, into your own way of life, your own being, all of that. So, which makes us sort of dismiss the truth in who we are. So, when people find human design or when they discover it, the first thing, they're like, oh, I'm this, and it's this big kind of revelation with yourself where you're just like, okay, this makes sense. And then even though like some things will be working and you're like, well, I'm not going to follow my strategy because, this is working for me now. I hear that a lot, like, oh, this, me doing this is working now. And then people come back to it and say, well, it's not working anymore. What's going on? Or I find a lot, what I'm getting a lot, especially with people finding me is, and which is really cool, and I'm so thankful for it, is that people have already sort of known about their aura type, but they have dismissed their strategy and their authority. And, it's 6 months from the first time they found it, or a year or two. And they're like, yeah, I know about my aura type a while ago, but I never really paid any attention to it. And I found you, and it makes sense. So, which is kind of interesting, because that's what I love to do, is just make it make sense for people. But that part of people not paying attention comes from conditioning. So your open centers are, how can I put this? They are like your worst enemy and your biggest critic. So your open centers should on you a lot. So it's like, oh, you should do this or you should do that. It's a lot of different opinions about your life or where you are. So I'm going to go through the open centers. I'm going to go, the centers in general. And I'm just going to explain some things with the centers. So an undefined, you'll hear that a lot in human design, undefined or defined. An undefined center is white. And that's what we're talking about. Open or inconsistent personality traits. A defined center, colored in, so it has a color, is a fixed or consistent personality trait. So each of the centers have a lot of, um, if you want to say, healthy and unhealthy strategies for each center. And when you usually come into human design, I would say 50-50. I would say more like 70-30. 70% of the time you are operating in the unhealthy part of that center, whether it's opened or defined. So that's important to know. Everybody has their journey. The great thing about human design, which I'm sure you all who have been listening to my podcast and my posts and everything on Instagram, is that it's really about rediscovering who you are and getting to the core of who you are, healing that inner child, and then figuring out where you want to go from there. Human design helps you with that. With the centers, it's about breaking down each center and figuring out, okay, not necessarily where you've been doing things wrong at, but more about where you've been ignoring some of the conditioning that you've been subjected to as a child or as a teen or as an adult, and just ignoring it and not doing anything about it. So we're going to get started with some of the centers and what they actually, some of the unhealthy strategies of them, both defined and undefined. So the head center, that's the top of the heap. That's that triangle that's pointing right at the top. And your head center is for inspiration, and it's also a center, excuse me. The head center, when it's open, it's full of ideas. It is just amazing. So in its natural state, your head center, undefined, which means it's white. You have a lack of mental pressure. When it's defined, you have a lot of pressure to resolve your thought process and patterns. People with defined heads are very, they have a lot of mental pressure to get things done. Sometimes they also have a lot of deep anxiety, a lot of self-doubt or depression. Those are people with defined centers that are colored. When they're undefined, it's like, it's like, well, TMI, because I have an undefined head center. People with undefined head centers can become really lost and overwhelmed by doubt and confusion. Sometimes we end up trying to resolve other people's questions. We take on the worries of other people a lot when you have an undefined head center. Sometimes we're unable to have a clear or clean headspace and to relax in our own thoughts. That's why I tell people who have undefined head centers to keep an idea journal, keep a thought journal with you all the time, because since it's open, it becomes sometimes a little bit overwhelming with all the thoughts that we have, all the ideas that we have. So write them down. And save them for later or give them to somebody else, as I like to say. When you have a defined head center, it's a little bit different because you feel the pressure to resolve issues, to resolve your thoughts. You are not patient. You don't really have the same level of inspiration that someone with a open head does. It's kind of fixed, which is nothing wrong with it, but I like to say defined heads, when it comes to inspiration and ideas, are sometimes a little bit uptight. They just are sort of like, well, if this is true, then this is what it is. An open head center will be like, well, let's see where this can take us. They're a lot more, they follow the path of least resistance when you have an open head. A defined head is going to not necessarily follow the path of resistance, but they're going to try and stay on the trail based on the map. The open head is like, if we get lost, we'll get there. If that makes any sense. So some of the tips that an open head and a defined head should follow would be the following. So a defined head really needs to accept your mental pressure, and accept like the ability to try and get inspiration, to try and get inspired, to sort of release that tension in your mind, to not have so much pressure, and to resolve thoughts, but try to let it flow. An undefined head center, some of the tips is that enjoying the process, the thought process, enjoying the pressure that comes with thinking, but not to be overwhelmed by it. Try not to withdraw when you're doubtful or confused, and try to get clear on where the inspiration is coming from, where those ideas are coming from. Because sometimes, like I always tell people with open heads, they might not be your own. So just think about that. That's really, really important. So next we have the ajna. I like saying it like that. Sorry, guys. The ajna. So the ajna is the triangle that is pointing down underneath the head. And the ajna is the center for conceptualization and mental awareness. Now, a disclaimer. In human design, we are taught that you are not to make, and you probably heard me say this on the podcast, you are not to make any decisions with your mind. You are to use your sacral, use use your intuition, use your guts, the feeling of those decisions. I like to say that your decisions or your thoughts, think of them as being put up, that you're on parole. I know that's like nobody wants to go to jail. I get that. But this is the best analogy that I have, that your thoughts are being put up. You're about to go on parole. So your thoughts are just going in front of the parole board, and you're just pleading your case to the parole board, whether or not you should be free or not. So think about your thoughts. So you don't need to, what I'm trying to say is, in human design, you don't make decisions with your mind. You utilize how you're feeling about them. You follow your strategy. Is it an invitation? Is it, are you responding to something? Are you informing, etc.? So when you are making decisions in human design, think about those decisions and thoughts as going up for parole. That you're just sitting there with it, and the parole board is listening to your problem or your question. So the parole board is your mind. It's just there for like the fact and fiction, and then you follow your strategy. So a lot of people, that happens with their ajna, is the conceptualization and mental awareness. Part of it is those thoughts, the way of thinking. So now when you have an undefined ajna, it is or open. I'm not going to keep reiterating that. It's undefined, it's open, defined, closed, or colored. When you have undefined ajna, you worry about understanding stuff. You worry about remembering things. So you, I don't want to say you try too hard to be intellectual, but you try holding to a fixed mental process. You try holding on to concepts and opinions, and you always trying to convince people that you're right, or that you're talking about, and sometimes you let your mind run your life, and so that's definitely not what you want to do. Now, if you have a defined ajna, it's a lot different. You can create some, the bad side of it is that sometimes defined ajnas can create lots of anxiety with trying to work out decisions in their mind mentally. When I see someone who, especially projectors, I sort of like who are mental projectors, and a mental projector is someone who has both a defined head center and a defined ajna, and then everything below is undefined. In a way, I sort of not feel sorry for them, but I feel for them, because it's a lot of mental anguish going on in your mind, because these things are the two, I don't want to say most important, but as we know, when you're in your mind a lot, you you suffer. Your mind plays tricks on you. So when you're in your mind and your ajna a lot, you can really do, I don't want to say damage, but it's harder to grasp concepts. It's harder um to think about certain things. So when people have both defined ajanas and head centers, I almost like just want to give them a hug because of the mental roller coaster, and the conceptual roller coaster that they are constantly on. So for my undefined people, it's a little bit different because it's not a consistent thought pattern, but that can also make you feel a little crazy too because it's not consistent. But when you have a defined, you do have a distinct way of thinking. So some of an unhealthy defined ajna, like I said, is creating anxiety about making those decisions. If it's undefined, like I said, you're going to try too hard to convince people that you're right. You're going to hold on to different concepts that might not serve you. You're going to allow your mind to run your life in times. More of the healthier strategies for your defined and undefined. A defined is to more be a little bit comfortable about research and to not have anxiety about researching ideas or concepts. For undefined is to really have a versatility with your intelligence, to accept the uncertainty of your thought pattern, to be okay with that. And that's why I said sometimes when you have an undefined ajna, it sort of your mind playing tricks on you all the time because you don't have a consistent thought pattern. You might be thinking something through one way and then all of a sudden you change that. It can be very confusing. So when you have a defined ajna, like I said, try to definitely get comfortable with researching, not have anxiety around it. When you have an undefined ajna, get comfortable with the uncertainty of your thought patterns because that's really important so you don't go crazy with any one of those. The next step that we'll talk about is a very important one, and this is, I love the throat center. The throat center is extremely, extremely important in human design. The throat center is the center for manifestation, for speech, and for speaking and acting upon something. You always hear me call projectors with defined throats projector unicorns, and that's because the throat center is the center for speech. When you have a defined throat center, you are able to speak or act things and people will hear you faster. They will listen to you more. Jeff Bezos has a defined a defined throat center. Cardi B has a defined throat center. Serena Williams has a defined throat center. Issa Rae has a defined throat center. Those are all projectors, and they have defined throat centers. Any manifesting generators have a defined throat center. Any manifestors have a defined throat center. So when you have a defined throat center, some of the not so good strategies that defined throat centers find themselves in is that sometimes they speak too inappropriately. They talk too much. They talk so much that they lose the impact. We can use Cardi B as an example. Sometimes she'll go on these rants where it's like 15 freaking Instagram like posts about something that she's mad at. And by like the third or fourth one, she loses her impact and then it becomes annoying. So if you have a defined throat center, that's not a good, healthy strategy for you, is speaking too readily or too inappropriately all the time. What you want to move to, more of a healthier way of using your defined throat center, and this is anyone, and that is to know that when you speak, your voice is going to have its own type of truth. So you want to make sure that it's consistent and reliable to your thoughts and how you feel. Not saying you have to walk on eggshells with a defined throat center, but the healthier way is to just speak and act in a more positive way, in a more constructive way to your life. Now, when you have an undefined throat center, there's a lot of silence because it's just best that way. In a way, I have an undefined throat center. So for me, like this podcast, is something that I don't want to say is like a stretch for me, but because I love to talk, but my voice is, for me, my voice is very, very, how can I put this? My voice is extremely, it's important to who I am for a various amount of reasons. My moon is in Taurus, and my moon are my emotions, and Taurus is defined. If you look at a body scan of like what each zodiac sign rules, you'll find that associated kind of a part of your body. So because my voice is so distinct, I always get compliments on it. People constantly DM me about my voice. I've been people have prophesized about my voice. I can tell you stories about my voice, but my voice is associated with Taurus. Those are my emotions, and Taurus is my moon sign. So my voice is very intricate to who I am. But however, I have an undefined throat center. So because of that undefined throat center is, especially with me being a projector, if I speak without an invitation or inappropriately at the wrong time, I am like literally stretching and hurting myself. People who have undefined throat centers, it's more key for us to be very careful on how we utilize our voice, about us speaking in conversations before people invite us, etc. I don't care what your aura type is, because those can lead to problems. I don't know if you guys heard me in a past podcast, but I can, I experienced that with my voice and not speaking up for myself in certain situations and things like that. But I had a big cancer scare, a big throat cancer scare a while ago, and literally had to like my, doctor, like was driving. She was like, I need you to pull over. And, and then I had to go through like a series, like almost 2 months of on and off biopsies. One of my last biopsies was like probably the worst. I was at Johns Hopkins, and, they're very thorough there. I would say that, but they had a team of 8 people, just going back to backgrounds, pulling samples from my throat. It was a lot, but because of me having an undefined throat center, it explains why. And if you listen to Louise Hay, any Hay House stuff, you can heal your life, or anything that you read about her, anybody who has throat issues, any kind of throat problems, it's about your voice and about your internal voice, your inner voice. And that also relates to in human design when you have an undefined throat center. So some of the correct strategies for people with undefined throat centers are to be a little bit more versatile with our voice. And that is to communicate, of course, after we receive invitations to speak, to be comfortable with silence, to wait for people to give us that room to speak. And this is really important for projectors, especially projectors who have undefined throats. It's really, really key for us, projectors and reflectors, because reflectors have undefined throats as well. But it's really key for us to learn how to be more silent and learn how to be okay with waiting for people to give us that okay, if that makes any sense. So that's your throat center. But people who have defined throats, I always say, because it's the manifestation center in human design, if you know someone who has a defined throat, get them to manifest for you using their voice. And I always tell people who have defined throats, or manifesting generators especially, to especially if they're having hurdles in their own manifestation process, I always tell them to manifest for other people. because that is the quickest way for a manifesting generator or some aura type with a defined throat to really see the power of a defined throat. That is, I mean, you can't even imagine just some of the tips and stuff that I've given people who have defined throats to manifest for other people, and they just like, yep, it came quick for them, and it's just like, well, it can come quick for you. You just have to like utilize that for yourself. But the next section, the next center is going to be the G center. The G center, the G center. Ooh-cha. The G center is one of the most, I don't want to say integral. That's, it is just a really important part of your chart. An open G is what they call, we call it in human design. Then you have a defined G. This, in my opinion, and when I released the Pathway to Purpose course, I talk a lot about the G center. The defined G, the undefined G, the G center is the center for identity and your higher self. And your G center is just, I can't even explain how it can, I don't want to say make or break somebody, but it's just, it's all about yourself, your self-awareness of who you are, how you've been conditioned. Your G center holds a lot of keys to breaking down and healing that inner child and really getting to the bottom of things, really, when it comes to the way you were raised, the way you identify with yourself now. And so the G center is just, it's a magical place, but it also can be a very dark place. And it can be a place that you really need, that you have a lot of soul searching to do. So when you have a defined G center, you have more of a fixed sense of yourself. However, people who have defined G centers, some of the negative things that come up for them is that they can get depressed. Because people with defined Gs, they do like to repress some of these things that are deep down inside. They try and just like not acknowledge that. So what they do is that they put their feelings or the things that they want for themselves to the side so they can please other people. Defined G centers also can sometimes feel lost and have no sense of direction in life. But that is more from conditioning. So in some human design things that you might read, they say, oh, a defined G knows more about themselves. I feel that a defined G or undefined G can get conditioned by their environment, the people around them. I think defined Gs have a harder time, deconditioning from those negative things that they've experienced about themselves. Open Gs or undefined Gs, I think they have it a little bit easier. So I'm going to talk more about that in my Pathway to Purpose course. It's actually going to be dual. I've decided to do Pathway to Purpose and Profits all in the same course. So it's going to be a course that I'm working on putting it both together. So once you find your purpose, then you can figure out how to profit from it. But it's going to be talking about the G center, your North Node, which I'm like super obsessed with North Nodes. That's one of my favorite parts in astrology is your North Node and Jupiter, the planet Jupiter. Those are my favorite things to talk about when it comes to business and who you're supposed to be and all that good stuff. Anyway, so your defined G center, when more of a positive strategy for you is trying to really, how can I put this? When you have a defined G center, you want to make sure that you express the way you love in a more consistent manner, that you focus on where you want to go, and how you want to make progress, because that's more of a positive aspect for you having when you have a defined G. So you have more reliable sense of yourself and who you are. Like I said, sometimes, and it's more common than not when people do find human design, they do have they do when people have defined G centers, sometimes you are really just messed up from your childhood, and you still kind of can experience some of the things that undefined G's experience. So for instance, an undefined G center, we can tend to, and this is more in your 20s, I can attest to this, college, you get a little lost in who you are merged, especially in relationships. Ooh, woo. Undefined G's, the attachment to ourselves sometimes comes from other people. We try to hold on to love, whether it's good for us or not, because we have an attachment to that. We worry a lot about not having control over our lives. Undefined G centers, actually, it's so funny because I have friends, or I'm friends with people from all walks of life. You will find that undefined G centers will have an array of friends, from just everybody, and that's who I was in high school. Like, I was the girl who, I was cool with everybody. I was cool with the band kids. I was cool with the goth kids, or the emo kids. I was cool with all of the athletes. Like, I was a true chameleon, and that's what undefined G's are. And the more undefined G's get comfortable with that they will experience the more positive side of that, is to really allow themselves to move with the way that things are going, to surrender that they don't know what's going to happen next. Undefined G's, this is a really good tip, and a lot of people, I don't want to say people don't talk about it in human design, but if you have an undefined G, it's super important for your environment and your location. So if you are unhappy, like if everything is like, going pretty good in your life, your job, your career, your business, your love life, and then something doesn't feel right, it's probably your, like, where you live. I would suggest either moving or possibly like redecorating or something. And I can attest to this as an undefined G. When I like somewhere that I live, I will stay there. Because I like where I live. Like right now, I really love where I live. I like my place. I like just the little things. Like, I'm super thankful and grateful for my balcony, even though it points to just trees and a man-made lake. Like, I really enjoy that. I like the location where my place is. I like the way the layout is. That's super important for undefined G's. So that's the G center. Next episode, we're going to touch on the rest of the centers. I like to keep my podcast a little shorter so you can digest in chunks. So part 2 of Don't Front, Your Centers Got You Open, we're going to hit the heart, the spleen, the sacral, the solar plex, and the root. So stay tuned for that. That's going to be the next podcast. And then all the podcasts after that, going to be the relationship podcast. So you'll get those as well. So thank you so much for listening to another episode of Is My Aura on Straight. Definitely look at your charts and see what you have defined or undefined. And if you're not following me on Instagram, make sure you follow me on Instagram. If you haven't had a chance to get a reading from me, definitely do that as well. And if you have any questions, like I always say, please feel free to send me a DM or email me. But until next time, have a great, great day filled with good vibes and great energy. Bye-bye. Thank you for listening to another episode of Is My Aura on Straight? Make sure you follow me on Instagram at AC Brown, and also check out my website for products and services at www.acbrown.com. And until we meet again, make sure you have a great week filled with good vibes and good energy.